Okay, evening everybody. 6, so we'll make a start. Welcome to this meeting of the Audit Committee on Wednesday, 2nd of April 2025. Just to remind everybody present, this meeting will be broadcast live via YouTube and will be archived for future viewing. Could all council officers ensure that when they speak, they switch the microphones on, and when they finish speaking, they switch the microphones off. This is extremely important for the live stream to ensure the cameras will be focused on the individual who's speaking. Moving back to the agenda, item 1 is apologies for absence. Could we receive any apologies, please, Emily?
Thank you, Chair. We've received apologies from Councillor Beach, Councillor Hadley and Councillor Sankey, who has also appointed Councillor Gaskin as his substitute for the meeting.
Thank you very much and welcome Councillor Gaskin. Item 2, declarations of interest. Do any councillors have any declaration of interest to declare on the items under discussion at tonight's meeting? No, thank you. Item 3, urgent business brought forward under Rule 12. I'm not aware of any urgent business for consideration at the meeting. Item 4, questions from the public. We've not received any questions from members of the public. Item 5, questions from members of the committee. We've not received any questions from members of the committee. Item 6, the public minutes of the previous meeting on the 5th of February 2025. Any comments on the minutes? No, in that case I propose the approval of the public minutes from the previous meeting. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Krupski, thank you. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Thank you. Vote's carried. Item 7, internal audit outstanding actions. Colleagues remember from the previous meeting we had a few outstanding internal audit actions for the head of legal and regulatory services monitoring officer area. John's kindly joined us on Zoom, I think he's behind me, to provide an update. So I'll hand over to John to provide that update.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, councillors. Is the audio all good? Can you hear me?
Yeah, fine, I think, John. Thank you.
Okay, there seems to be a bit of a delay, but I can hear you. So looking at the agreed actions in order, in particular the reference to a testing phase, what I would say, councillors, is that the new asset software, Dynamics, is up and running and is being used by the council's asset department, which is positive. Moreover, from a GDPR and a data loss perspective, our data has been backed up and is secured for the assets. Looking at the other actions, I think one of the main hurdles we have experienced is in terms of functionality. The dynamic software currently isn't as versatile as what we'd hoped. For example, there isn't the ability to access map info like we could on the old software. And this is quite an important feature for an asset terrier, and it means that officers are loading up different pieces of software in order to form their role. Whereas previously it was already integrated into the software. Moreover, it currently doesn't have the functionality to develop a program of building inspections, nor does Dynamics integrate into our Outlook calendars like we'd hoped for. So we are still reliant on inputting information to our own calendars and then performing manual checks for things like EPC certificates or confirming with colleagues in facilities the date of the last, for example, electrical inspection. So inspections are still, of course, happening, condition surveys are taking place, and EPC certificates are still being renewed for properties, but it isn't by virtue of the new dynamic software that we're using. And in a similar vein, when we're looking at statutory compliance checks and the completion of, the approach we are currently having to undertake is similar. It's utilising our calendars, manual checks of individual properties. Again, we do this with the assistance of colleagues in facilities who are the team on the ground, for example, ensuring that inspections have taken place. In terms of the final agreed action, any performance management information will have to be produced independently, because Dynamics does not facilitate this, nor am I aware that it can be adapted to do so, but that can be easily remedied, and we do have draft reports we can adapt for this. Nevertheless, councillors and chair, I think the points I make here about the agreed actions are perhaps overshadowed by the discontinuance of Dynamics in the near future. I believe we have until December 2026 latest before we possibly move away from the software as a council. Now, this is relatively recent news from IT, and you're not the only department who will be considering their options in this regard. But I think, had we been aware at the time of the transition to Dynamics, we no doubt would have continued with our original procurement exercise back in 2023, appointing an external supplier. I think that's everything, Chair, and I'm happy to take any questions, councillors.
Okay, thank you, John. Any questions from colleagues? No, thank you. That's really useful. So it sounds like a timing thing and a long-term change as much as anything that's caused that issue. But yeah, thank you for coming along tonight. It gives some assurance about that moving forwards. I guess we'll let you go if you'd like to go, John. If you miss us, you can catch us on YouTube, I'm sure. But thanks again for coming along tonight.
Thank you, Chair.
Appreciate the update.
Have a good evening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Okay, item 8 is the internal audit progress report. So now I invite Tracy and Ruby from 360 Assurance to provide an update.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take the progress report as read. Since our last progress report provided to the committee, we've issued one final report, 2 draft reports, and agreed 2 terms of reference and made considerable progress against the delivery of the plan. Accompanying the progress report is a briefing paper on the new Global Internal Audit Standards, which came into effect on 1st of April, and that's just included for information. I would just draw your attention to the follow-up position, which is currently at 40% for the first follow-up rate, and ideally we'd like to see this do the 75% target, but more information is provided on that separately in our action tracking report. Appendix A provides you with an outturn on the delivery of the internal audit plan. Appendix B provides you a summary with the final reports that we've issued. Appendix C gives you the summary of the 2 terms of reference that have been agreed. Appendix D gives you the KPI performance, and Appendix E is a short summary of the action tracking position. And I'll pause there to take any questions, Chair.
Thanks, Ruby. Any questions? Again, we've got the item on private to dig into the action track if we need to. Any questions at this stage? No, okay. Thank you much, Ruby. We now move to item 9, sorry, thank you. The internal audit plan for 25-26. With 2 reports to consider under item 9. We've got the internal audit plan for 25-26 and the global internal audit standards. We'll first consider the internal audit plan for 25-26 and hand back to Tracy and Ruby to provide an update on that item.
Thank you, Chair. So the document in front of you today, it sets out how we've put the plan together and the consultation process that we've undertaken and the approach that we'll be taking for the plan for the 25-26 year. We've designed it to make sure that we're complying with the global internal audit standards, and it also will be able to give you a head of internal audit opinion for the 25-26 year. We've undertaken a risk assessment process, so we've looked at those risks that were in the strategic and corporate risk registers at that point in time, and also areas and priorities that were in the corporate plan. So that's fed into the process of putting the plan together, and you'll see there are some cross-referencing in the plan to show that. It is a flexible approach, so we will keep it under review throughout the year. So if anything changes, we will look to review and potentially anything that we add or adapt within the plan. We'll discuss that with the relevant managers and come back to yourselves as audit committee to make sure that you're happy with any changes to it. So it's here for a proposal for your consideration and sign off today. In Appendix A, that gives you the detail of the areas that we'd like to cover within the annual plan. Appendix B shows you the detail of the 3-year strategic plan, so you can see what it is we've covered in the 24-25 year, then what we're proposing for 25-6, and then what areas we would be considering and looking to cover in the 26-27 part of the plan. And then Appendix C is our 360 Assurance Charter. So together with the plan, we'd be looking for your sign-off and agreement to the charter as well today. In terms of engagement, we've liaised and had planning meetings. We've held those with the chief officers and heads of service, and that was towards the end of February, early March. and then the actual drafter plan that you see today, that has gone to the corporate management team last week for their consideration and comments before coming to yourself today. So I'll pause there in case there's any comments on the plan before.
Thanks, Tracy. Any questions? No, I just had one just purely from my understanding. So Appendix A2, the exclusions. In A2.1, it says the following audits have been recommended for review in 25 and 26, but not included in the plan. Who recommended them? Is that?
That was based on when we've put together our three-year strategic plan last year, we perhaps would have had it targeted for 25, 26 within that. And also from our own reviews previously, we would have looked to put those audits in 25, 26. But obviously things have moved on and changed, and we've reflected on the work that's come out of the 24, 25 year delivery. So that's why we're not looking to put those in for 25, 6.
Thank you. That makes complete sense. Just my own understanding.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. If there's no more questions, are we okay to approve that without a vote? Is everyone happy with that? Okay. Great. Thank you. So we move on to the second report on this item. That's the Global Internal Audit Standards. I'll hand back to Tracy and Ruby.
Thank you, Chair. This paper is just a briefing paper for information. From the 1st of April 2005, the Global Internal Audit Standards have come into effect. So this is just there to give you an update of the areas, and just to give you assurance that we've ensured that everything within our audit manual, our charter, our service level agreements and everything have all been updated in terms of terminology and some minor areas to make sure everything's fully compliant with the standards. So it's just there for information. But happy to take any comments if there are any.
Great, thank you. Any comments, questions? No, brilliant. Thank you very much. So we'll move on to item 10, which is the external audit plan for 24-25. Invite Laura and Bethany from Assets to present the report.
Thanks, Chair. So our external audit plan for 24-25 sets out our risk-based approach to the external audit of the financial statements for the year ending March 25, as well as our value for money work. So this plan does also set out our independence to you as Audit Committee as well, to confirm that we're able to complete the audit. I will take the report as read, but I will just draw members' attention to a couple of areas in the report, if that's okay. So page 9 of our report sets out our materiality that we are working to as part of our audit. We have considered this at planning based on the prior year gross revenue expenditure of the council, and we will look to update this upon receipt of the draft accounts for 24-25 when they're available. So this page sets out the work that we will perform based on a materiality threshold. The performance materiality is what we would base some of our detailed testing on, and we would perform work up to this point. The trivial threshold of 82,000 is highlighted there as well on page 9, and we will report any adjustments or differences to you above this amount. The risks that we've identified as part of our planning work are set out on pages 10 to 15. The significant risks that we've identified are consistent with the prior year. We have identified one additional, what we would call a medium level risk, which is set out on page 15. And this relates to a new accounting standard that came into effect from the 1st of April 2024. Which is in relation to IFRS 16, which relates to right of use assets and the corresponding lease liabilities for those. So we've highlighted the completeness of the identification of those leases as a medium level risk for the 24-25 audit, and we have set out on the right hand side of that table our planned approach to that risk. Further along in our report on pages 17 to 19, we detail our value for money risk assessment. We haven't identified any risks of significant weakness at this stage. That's everything I wish to highlight in the report, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions? Great, and without jumping too far ahead, with FRS 16, we've got the accounting policies on the agenda for later in the meeting, so that's really positive. Great, thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go back to the agenda. Yeah, nice segue into item 11, which is the accounting policy for 24-25. So hand over to Dan to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the and audit regulations for 2015 require the Council to prepare a statement of accounts in accordance with proper accounting policies. These primarily comprise even of the Code of Practice on Local Authority Accounting in the United Kingdom for 2024-25 and are supported by the International Financial Reporting Standards. This report sets out the accounting policies which the Council understand to be significant and will be published as part of the financial statements for 2024-25. As mentioned, the Code of Practice has implemented a new accounting standard, IFRS 16, from the 1st of April 2024. IFRS 16 is an accounting rule regarding the treatment of lease agreements in financial statements. This has therefore been reflected in the updated accounting policies, replacing the draft policy for this change, which is included in the 2023-24 accounting policies. It would be unusual for an authority to change the base of any accounting principles outside of any code requirements, and as such the other amendments have been minor clarification points and rolling forward of dates. The committee is recommending to note the accounting policies at Appendix A, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions? It all seems very straightforward and sensible. Okay, great stuff. Thank you, Dan. So we're now on to item 12, Treasury Management Update Report for Q3 of 24-25, and that's back with Dan.
Thank you, Chair. In summary, the report confirms that the Council's Treasury Management activities during Q3 of 24-25 have been in line with the approved strategy, with highlights set out in the report as follows. The Council's external borrowing is £5.93 million as at the 31st of December 2024, with an average interest rate payable of 4.85%. Investments as at the 31st of December 2024 stood at £63.15 million, with investment returns from the start of the financial year having averaged 4.88%, with a forecast of 657k overachievement of budgeted income. Appendix A provides full details of those investments held at the 31st of December 2024. As a result of this overachievement, Cabinet in March 2025 approved a transfer of 500k of this overachieved income to a capital programme earmark reserve to help mitigate risk of future capital project costs. The committee is recommended to note the position as at Q3, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions? Councillor Kirby?
The investments we have in America is, I've asked questions in other places of other people. Do we consider any of them vulnerable? Do we consider any of them unethical in the comparison to policies that we do have on things like biodiversity and the not in favour of carbon pollution production? I'm speaking effectively of those that we have with Royal Bank of Canada, their subsidiary RBS down in America. They're having to abide by the new government in the States, and as such their particular investment aims are going to be contrary to what we would have expected when we put the money, we invested the money into those banks, because now they're taking the money out, they're investing it to local companies and probably not doing it in a way that we would appreciate fully. Sorry if it's a googly.
So, no, I think obviously the position as at the 31st December, obviously shown in Appendix A, that obviously gives the various financial deposits and certificates of deposits that are held by the council. Obviously, we wish to review that in future in terms of any changes that do come about, then we may wish to do that. Obviously, the Treasury Management Strategy does set out those policies in terms of the priorities for investments. So that would be essentially the guideline that we would follow. We may look and wish to review that in the future based on any changes that may occur. But obviously, that would be something that we would follow as part of that policy that's set annually.
Yeah, Lloyd.
Yeah, I'd just follow that up with the fact that we did have some training on Treasury Management at the previous Audit Committee, and slides are available to members, but you'll remember from that training that we have to follow regulatory guidance in terms of our investments, and environmental considerations aren't necessarily those that we have to prioritise. So the things we have to prioritise are security, so are the counterparties that we're investing in, do they meet our credit worthiness tests, which all of those set out in the report do. And then it's liquidity, which is can we access the money that we've invested when we need to access it for our own purposes. And then it's yield, so yield being the final consideration in terms of we don't prioritise yield over credit worthiness. That's our final choice. But what we follow in terms of guidance there doesn't incorporate environmental considerations at the moment in the code. So the training did set out how we might seek to incorporate some of that going forward, but there are risks associated with incorporating environmental considerations into our treasury management policies and strategies in terms of restricting the numbers of counterparties that we might use and impacting on the returns and the risk of counterparties that we incur with those investments as well. So it's not one of the considerations at the moment. The primary consideration is security, liquidity, then yield.
Yeah, I understand the legislative net that the government throws over you, but it's quite a wide hold net. And I guess accountancy being such a dry subject, that you, would I be right in thinking that you needed direction from people other than yourselves to consider more ethical things that the government is not particularly interested in, because the accountants have set, their dry accountants have set our dry accountants the same sort of protocols to work within. You know, one question that comes to mind would be, if we sat here in 1941, would we be considering whether an investment into Dachau was a proper and right investment? And I don't think we would. Who directs the people then who do the accountancy is then the question. So I guess the question is, if I consider, and at 9 o'clock tonight we might find a horrible answer, if I consider our investments there to be not in the interests of the people whose money it is, which you also have to bear in mind, or should bear in mind, they're the residents of East Staffordshire. If they were to see that the investment in places which was counteractive to what they particularly thought they were their own interests, then there might be some sort of fallout. So who would you take guidance from, having financially met the strictures of central government?
If I could just check my understanding as well. So the training we had around this said that if ESBC were to have any kind of freedom in this, it would need a change from national government. The restrictions on local authorities around liquidity, security and yield are pretty all-encompassing. So without something changing from a central government perspective, we have very little room for manoeuvre. I think if we were to look at this, it would need to come from the strategy, presumably. So that's the point at which, if that strategy were to change, we'd be able to look at whatever latitude we have got. But the impression I got was there's very little until we get a change from central government.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest, Chair. So obviously
Thank you very much. Yeah.
So as the chair's just set out, we have to follow regulation and legislation that's there. So that regulation is quite clear at the moment in terms of our priorities being security, liquidity, then yield. So unless there are changes to that regulation nationally, we're very limited in terms of what we can then do around that.
Councillor, can we let Councillor Slater come in? Councillor Slater? Yep.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't want to interrupt. If Mick was going to go, were you going to go, Mick? Sorry.
I was, but
Oh.
I lost my train of thought, so carry on.
Okay. It's sort of related to Mick's question about guidance, and I'm pleased to hear what I've just heard, and you're obviously thinking about the guidance changing at some point and thinking about incorporating more environmental risks into your calculations. Right, I'm looking at the big pile here of international investments, and I'm just wondering if I know you haven't got guidance on this just yet, but there's a lot of foreign banks there, a lot of banks in Canada which are particularly at risk, I think, from Trump's antics about the tariffs and such like. And so if it seems likely we're going to be in a world full of tariffs, does this affect our investment strategy, or should we be thinking about it now in advance before we get to that point? Because I have a feeling it could well do, couldn't it? And therefore we might want to retrench, if nothing else, away from risky foreign banks to our own homegrown risky local banks. Thank you.
So we've got a minimum credit worthiness criteria in our strategy, and that's what we follow. So that's informed by our external treasury management advisors. So if there is a risk of the credit worthiness of one of our banks that we've invested in changing, we have weekly updates from our treasury management advisors to identify that, and it gives us the opportunity then to withdraw funds from those investments and seek to place them with an institution that still meets our credit worthiness. There haven't been any impacts on the credit worthiness of banks because of international incidents that you've referred to so far, but whether that has an impact going forward or not, if it does, we will obviously take account of that, and as you've suggested, Councillor Slater, we'd then look at other investments that we might want to utilise that do meet our credit worthiness criteria. We get a weekly outlook, so I say weekly in terms of an email, but if there is something that changes in between that, we obviously...
Yeah, one of the banks that we have an investment with, we're a group of 4 which were fined £100 million for insider trading recently. Are we saying that the people who provide us with information with regard to risks don't take that sort of illegal activity into account when they are determining the risk of whether that bank will continue much longer, or what the exposure is of it not continuing much longer?
So the information we get would mainly be based on their credit worthiness. So even £100 million fine for a bank isn't necessarily material or significant to their ongoing operations, and wouldn't necessarily impact on their current credit score or credit worthiness. So if it does, and that downgrades their credit rating at the moment, then if that falls below our strategy minimum credit worthiness, then we would stop investing with them. But even a fine of that nature, as you said, across a number of banks is probably unlikely with the scale of those banking organisations to impact on their credit rating.
I remember in 2008, Mr. Chairman, that one of the banks suffered a run on it so quick that it shut before even the doorman knew to close the doors. So we are vulnerable to a speed of damage that is beyond our control. I remember the Icelandic situation where this council lost several £100,000, I can't remember the exact figure, it was probably about 3 million or something like that. They say the world is changing. No, the world has changed. Things are now happening that were inconceivable 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I wonder whether or not, we've heard about the risks, the assurances and what have you. I've asked questions at one of the last meetings whether or not your predictions on budgets and what have you were done pre-Trump or post-Trump. It does seem to me that I'd probably have more prudent, to quote a former Chancellor and Prime Minister's favourite lady's name, I'd probably worry more than perhaps I should. But then again, I'm here to worry on behalf of a lot more people than just me individually. So I would like reassurances. I understand, and I've mentioned before, the dryness of accountancy. You know, if you're half a penny out, then the whole lot's bloody out, and you have to start again and check through until you find that half penny. I understand all that. And probably it's not an accountancy issue, it's probably an economist issue, that they take a political, not a mathematical view of the world. And I just worry that the state that we're in at the moment, we see it every day from the jockeying for position of the central government to try and avoid this, that or the other obstacles, that it is eventually, at some point in time, probably quicker than whatever, it is going to penetrate right down to district councils. We already know we're on notice of termination, but there will be somebody that follows us. So they have to pick up what we leave them. So I just wonder whether or not we've understood that the world has changed and that we need a new set of dynamics to ensure that what we have, we don't lose in a way which, if we'd have thought about it a bit more earlier, we wouldn't have lost eventually. So those are my concerns.
Lloyd, if you want to respond to that, then I'll move us on to the next item. Yeah.
I think we're not able to give you assurance that we aren't at risk with any of our investments. There will be investments, and we had this in the training as well, but every investment we make is with a counterparty. There is always a risk, whether we're in a period of economic upturn or downturn, there's always a risk with any investment that we could lose that investment and not get it back. The only control we've got around that at the moment is the use of credit ratings and credit watches on the institutions that we invest in. So that's the tool that we use in line with the regulation and the guidance that we follow. Things will move more quickly than we've seen them move over the last few years with the world we're in at the moment. But those ratings that we utilise and the watches that we utilise from our external advisors should pick up those increased risks, albeit things can move more quickly than they have done in recent years. But as I say, there is nobody can give you an assurance that if you make an investment with anybody, whether that's a UK bank or a foreign bank, that money will always come back to you. There is always an element of risk, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you, Lloyd. Thank you, everybody, for the questions. I'll move on to item 13, so Corporate Strategic Risk Report 24-25 Q3, and that's again with Dan to present.
Thank you, Chair. The report provides an overview of the strategic risks facing the authority as at the end of Q3 for 2024-25 and the actions taken or being taken to manage those. This is the first report using the updated format of the Strategic Risk Register, which was approved by Cabinet as part of the Risk Management Policy Update in December of 2024. The most significant changes made are the combining of previous corporate and strategic risks, as well as an inclusion of a target risk score, which is linked to risk appetite and the actions to be taken to try to achieve these target risk scores. Overall, the number of risks has reduced from 18 to 17 following the amalgamation of what were risks C5, which focused on funding reforms, and C17, which focused on funding reduction, into one consolidated risk, which is now S6, which focuses on both the risk related to funding reforms and funding reductions. 13 of the 17 risks have a new target score lower than their currently reported risk score. progress against these targets will be monitored in future quarters in line with the review timescales set out. The recommendation for Audit Committee is set out in section 11, where they're asked to note the update provided for quarter 3 for 24-25. Happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Dan. Any questions? Councillor Slater?
Thank you. So I can't find a page now. I've lost a page a minute. Let me go on. Oops, so sorry. Right, I'm just going to. It might seem a small point to some people, but I'm just going to mention the report, which talks. Lost it. Never mind. Right, I'll remember it. So the report talks about there being no specific climate change risk, doesn't it? Somewhere. I've read that. Didn't I? I did read that. And then it does say there's a. If I could find a page of it, I'd be helpful. Hang on, one moment. Sorry, I'm useless at technology. Anyway, so it does say there's no specific climate change risk action on here. But then, where are we? We're looking now looking at S14. There is a rubbish. Sorry, S15. Sorry, the risk of unforeseen environmental issues that could adversely impact the council services, including floods, fire, chemical, major disaster, terrorism. Well. My small point is, which for me is quite a big point, is that floods, fire, major disaster are climate change risks, and I'm just trying to get people to acknowledge that because I'm probably going to sound unkind now, but economics and auditing is not a science, whereas climate change is a science, and we know the climate's changing. We know floods are likely to be more apparent in the future, don't we? We've already been told recently that it's the driest, sunniest month. March for 60 years, and the previous month was fairly wet, and there were floods in February. And if we don't realise already, it's obvious to our own eyes, to my eyes anyway, that we're looking forward to a future where we have warmer, wetter winters with more floods, and drier, hotter summers with more droughts and more heat waves. And it would be nice to see this recognised in our risk assessment. I know it's not a credit-worthiness issue. I appreciate you've got to deal with the guidance you've got, but honestly, this is a real thing. And I think if my mission here is to represent the public and protect the public, then the more I say this, the happier I feel, and I would like everyone to agree with me. I'll stop there. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Slater. I think this might just be a technical thing about the wording of the reports. Environmental impacts in every report, isn't it? I think it's, yeah. Yes.
Sorry, Chair. So yeah, the report itself, writing the report and reporting that doesn't have an environmental impact, but you're correct, Councillor Slater, in terms of that. Risk S15 does cover those environmental issues, some of which obviously will link to climate change and how the council looks to respond to those.
Does that make sense? If the report was saying let's open a coal mine, there'd be an environmental impact of the report.
Yes,
but
there are no direct environmental impacts. Well, it is a direct. Flooding is a direct environmental impact, and it's not okay. It's not severe now, but it could easily become so, couldn't it? And so could the heat waves, and it could affect our population. And I just think we should take it more seriously, and it should be self-evident on here. It would be interesting to know, of course, how. I suppose maybe I should have asked this before. You must have guidance, surely, on the environment, on the environment, on all these. Where are we? All these considerations. Legal consideration. Obviously, you talk to the legal team, equalities and health. Maybe you talk to human resources. I don't know. And then all the other stuff. You need guidance on it, don't you? Or are officers doing it by themselves? Are they? Are you? Or is there some collective view within the council as to how these impacts are reported on? I keep seeing them. I keep seeing there are no environmental impacts on our reports. And to be honest with you, I can find environmental impacts in every report, not just this one, but every other report I read in the council. There is a definite environmental climate change impact on everything we do in the building. There really is, and it seems evident to me that we should we should make be aware of that. Even if we can't change things very little, if we're given the impression that it's not really an important issue, then that in itself is wrong. I think that's enough into it. I'll stop there.
It does. I think to try and explain it again, so in every report that comes to us, there'll be an item on environmental impact, and it's the impact of this cover sheet. So this cover sheet exists and has no impact on the environment, but what it presents, the strategic risk register, does focus on the environment. So it's, like I say, it's a technical thing where I understand where your point comes from, but the risk register itself focuses on the environment. The cover report doesn't have an effect on the environment existing. Is that a fair way of trying to describe it? Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, it does in a sense, because the people who direct this council, which is the cabinet and the leader, they read these reports and they look at the risks and the failures or the part failures or whatever, or the amount that are not meeting the deadlines they assumed. And do they become blinded to the realities of certain issues by the assurances that are psychologically presented to them in these reports? Because I'm a lot further to doomsday than Michael is. I'm reading now about the fact that the carbon balance that we have will only last 2 or 3 years, which in effect is the same as the financial report that the young lady, I forget her name now, the young lady that used to work here presented, because her boss had already left, and she was presenting that in 26-27 this council would be 25% spending beyond its resources, and there had to be some immediate attention to that, and there was, hence the garden waste, hence the car park rises and what have you. So we sit here and we look at these, and you're right, in a sense, in another dry sense, this has no impact directly on global warming or the carbon pollution that we generate. But through that, there is an effect, and it's an effect in there as to how people react to certain situations based on the assurances that they're given. So, it's a strange question, it's a strange point, but this is an accountants committee, scrutiny as well, or act. So we have to be more, I was going to say athletic, but hardly at my age can I attain that sort of speed and what have you, but we have to be more alacritous in what we consider the impact is on people who make the decisions, who aren't here tonight. And the psychology of how we mesh together is important in that sense. So I messed up.
I understand that. I do think we're getting slightly lost in the technicality on this one. We've got within 10.1, although it's got the proviso there's no direct environmental report, it does say that risk S15 sets out the actions taken to mitigate the risk of environmental issues. So I don't think there's that latent. It's not being mentioned. It's in the risk register under 15. I think that might just be a technicality that we've got a bit lost in, personally. Any more questions on that? Okay, I'll move us on. Item 14 is the Q3 reporting of write-offs, and this one's for Lloyd to present.
Thank you, Chair. So, in line with previous quarters and in line with the requirements in the Constitution, we do provide quarterly reports to the Audit Committee of any debts that have been written off. You'll note that in the table in the report, we have only written off one debt during Q3 of the 24-25 financial year, and that amounts to a total value for the council of £530.56, and that's in the area of council tax relating to one debtor where the debt was over 6 years old and we've exhausted all recovery action. So in line with recommended practice from SITFA, we are writing that out of our accounts now.
Thank you. Councillor Hudson.
Just a very minor point, Lloyd. It says £503.50 in the body of the report and £530.56 the other bits. It just needs a typo.
Thank you, Councillor Hudson.
Thank you.
Okay, any more comment on that? In that case, we'll move on. Thank you very much, Lloyd. Item 15, the final item of the public meeting, is the date of the next meeting, which is the 25th of June 2025, same time and place. We'll now move to the private section of our agenda. Apologies, I've lost that. So we have now 2 items to consider in private. So I move that in accordance with section 184 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the remainder of the meeting, as it's likely, in view of the nature of the business to be transacted or the nature of the proceedings, that there be disclosed exempt information as defined in paragraphs of Part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Act, indicated in brackets for each item number on the agenda. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Krupski, thank you. Now to the vote. All those in favour? Unanimous. Thank you very much. I'll now wait for Emily to stop the recording.